Hi, I'm John Gianangeli from Boulder Software. Good afternoon from Colorado. Today we're going to be talking about using SystemLink to manage LabVIEW and TestStand deployments. So here's the abstract. You can read through it real quick. But just to summarize, the problem statement is how we deliver these large deployment files to our customer because they tend to get pretty large, like a gigabyte or so. I know with today's modern storage of terabytes, that doesn't seem large, but we're talking about the actual delivery transfer mechanism like FTP or a removable USB drive or whatever. And so we're going to talk about using SystemLink to deliver that rather than setting up an FTP site or copying things to external drives and walking them over to your customer in-house or if they're not in-house, driving over there and giving it to them. But before we do that, let's go ahead and recognize our giants, our female. So the lady I picked out is Laurel Watts. And Laurel is one of the founders of our local community here in Colorado. She's a senior software engineer at NOAA, and she's been there since 2004. Prior to that, she was at NIST, and prior to that, she was at the U.S. Bureau of Mines. She has her bachelor's degree in biochemistry, master's degree in chemical engineering, and her PhD from Colorado School of Mines, also in, I guess it doesn't say which. These are photos of Laurel in Costa Rica holding a cockatoo and standing next to an instrument that she helped write software for. And that instrument got to go on the Global Hawk, which was an aircraft developed by the U.S. Air Force. 3 iterations of that aircraft, and then eventually NASA did a version of that. And here's a photo of Laurel sitting at Dryden Air Force Base performing one of her atmospheric experiments using that instrument. So thanks, Laurel. She's been a great contributor in our community here in Colorado and an inspiration to all of us and hopefully to lots of young women out there who can get into STEM programs. So we're going to talk about how do we deploy LabVIEW and TestStand, or how we used to, and maybe some new ideas about deployment. So we're going to look at the traditional deployment strategies for LabVIEW and for TestStand, and then the new strategies, and then the actual delivery mechanism for those. And then we're going to talk about SystemLink client and server as part of that new strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about security for SystemLink. And if we have time, if I get through the slides fast enough, we're going to talk about replicating development machines using SystemLink. So again, the problem statement is delivering these giant deployments. When you build the audience here is probably mostly LabVIEW. So when you build in LabVIEW, you build the executable and you build the installer. So you make 2 build specs, and eventually you end up with a lot of runtime software in your installer, and it sometimes approaches a gig, sometimes goes over. Your choices for delivering that to your customer, like again, if they're in-house at the cube next to you, you copy it to a USB drive or put it on a network drive, and there it is. But if they're not close, well, then you might use HTTP or FTP or something like that to deliver that software. What is SystemLink exactly? Well, this is directly from the NI website. So rather than me trying to redefine what it is, this is in NI's own words, including the graphic there. When you go to the SystemLink page, this is what you'll land on. And this describes how SystemLink connects data and systems together. So I'll give you just a second to read through that. One moment, sorry. Great. So some of this is rudimentary for you all. Being a CLA summit, you're going to build your LabVIEW program. So you start with an executable build specification. We're all familiar with this window. You go through all the items on the left, all the categories on the left, and you configure your build spec and you build it. Once you're done with that, you're going to have to deliver an installer, like an MSI-based installer. So you'll create another build spec for the installer. You'll include all of these runtime elements here, like NI 488.2 or DAC MX, or whatever needs to be deployed with your system in terms of runtime software. This is what makes your installers big, this part right here. Here's a screenshot of what you end up with in terms of file sizes. So the left side is the executable. The right side is the installer. Notice the executable is only about 7 meg. Once you add all those runtime elements that you're going to need to deploy this software, it gets to be about 1.2 gig in this case. It varies from project to project. As you build each of those, you might make them zip files. So you can see that this folder starts to accumulate different builds. I don't check my builds into Git, by the way. I check my source code in, but the builds are the product is what comes out of the build, is the actual installer. And I zip those up and archive them. So you can start to see that you're going to accumulate a lot of builds if you have a lot of customers and a lot of projects. So you'll start to accumulate those. Just to summarize what we just went through, you've got these two things you're going to put into this funnel. You're going to get a giant zip file out. The executable and the installer. Shifting gears, for those of you in the audience who are TestStand developers, one of the tricks we learned at Boulder Software during a TestStand track down at NI Week is to split these deployments into two pieces so that we can deliver a core that doesn't change or churn very often. And then the test itself, the client sequence, which might change frequently, is a smaller, more manageable thing to deploy that it's small enough you could email it. It might be like 10 meg or so. So we started using this strategy for TestStand. And so the core deployment ends up being fairly large, just like in LabVIEW. It's got a lot of runtime components to it, including the TestStand user interfaces that ship with TestStand. So it's going to deploy TestStand runtime, LabVIEW runtime, and the user interfaces. The client sequence will only have the code modules or the tests, the sequences themselves. And we also like to add TestStand config and components into that. If you're not familiar with TestStand, you might not know what those mean. If you're a TestStand developer, TestStand config might configure things like the database collection or things like that. So when we create a TestStand deployment, we start with a workspace. You could think of this kind of like a project in LabVIEW, although there are also TestStand projects, TestStand projects in this workspace. At any rate, you start with a workspace. This one happens to be our core deployment, and we've added the TestStand full-featured and simple operator interfaces in here. And as we go through the TestStand deployment dialogues, we can add all the runtime elements that we want to add. This is the TestStand deployment utility. It's come a long way over the years, but it's still a little tricky to get through the first couple of times you do it. I've been developing TestStand since before it was even called TestStand, since about 1994 or 5. It was a toolkit add-on. Eventually it became a product, and they came up with this TestStand deployment utility. And this is just the first tab. You can see all the tabs across the top. And in this case, we're going to build an MSI installer. In the other tabs, much like in LabVIEW, you can add the runtime elements and configure this installer to behave the way you'd like it to behave, like where it goes and what it includes. I'm not going to go through all those because it's a little bit more cumbersome than the LabVIEW build specs are. At any rate, that's traditionally how we would deploy TestStand is to make an MSI installer. What we end up with when we're done with that is, again, let me go back a couple slides. We've got two strategies here. We're trying to make it so we can deliver a very large runtime core like once or very infrequently. And then as the tests churn, we can deliver updates to the client sequences like, once a week, once a month, however often they need to be updated. So we end up with this screenshot of these sizes of the deployment. You can see on the left side that the core deployment is still pretty large, 760 meg. We'll call it a gig for simplicity's sake. But look at the client. The client's still pretty small. So now we have a method of deploying TestStand and being able to update the customer through email rather than through an FTP site or some other mechanism of delivery. We can literally zip this file and email it because it's small enough. That's traditionally how we got around that problem in TestStand. And I assume there's plenty of you out there who've solved the same problem in LabVIEW by breaking apart your runtime build specs from your main project. So to summarize the way we do it in TestStand, we've got two funnels. One is the core and one is the client. And those are roughly their sizes. So now we want to investigate what's the new way of doing this, or are there any new ways of doing this? And what I've discovered over the last couple of years is building packages. I believe this started in LabVIEW 2019. So in your build specs, you see that you now have a new type of build spec called package. So rather than building an executable and an installer, you can build a package. You do still need to build the executable, by the way, as part of this package, but you can skip the installer part. Very much like the build spec for the installer. Actually, let me go back to that slide so you can see it. This is the LabVIEW installer build spec where you have dependencies or what they call additional installers like GPIB or whatever other things you need to add on. In the package build spec, it's called dependencies instead of additional installers, but it's very much the same concept. What's going to happen with this is you're going to build a package and you're going to specify your dependencies, but what you end up getting out is much smaller than the installer, but a very similar concept. So the other piece of this that's really interesting is you can build this package to a feed. So rather than getting out a folder on your disk that's all the contents of the installer, you can put the feed name, you can see that I have the host name there as systemlink.bouldersoftware.com. Of course, you'll have to have a username and password to publish that to, and a feed name. In this case, the feed is my customer, Particle Measuring Systems, and their product name, NGLC, which is a next generation liquid particle counter. So we're just going to publish the build right to my SystemLink server. As opposed, now we'll make an intermediate file on disk. But unlike the installer, you would have to go then collect that output on your disk and zip it up and deliver it to your customer. Again, it's about a gigabyte or so. In the case of this style, we're going to just publish it right to our SystemLink server, to the feed. So when we compare this to the traditional LabVIEW strategy, look at the difference. Now we have an executable. It's still about 7 meg, and that's great. But look at our package. Now our package is also about 7 meg. So instead of being about a 1.2 gigabyte file that we have to deliver to our customer, we have a small package. And even though we're publishing this to our SystemLink server so that it can be consumed with a SystemLink client, you can actually give this package to your customer without SystemLink. And since the dependencies are metadata, once they install NI Package Manager, this package is going to install and find all the dependencies and install what it needs to in NI Package Manager. So you can do all this without SystemLink, which is kind of cool, because you might not want to go through the trouble of setting up a SystemLink server. So I would highly encourage you to start building packages and see how those work for you, because they're really a lot more efficient, I think. So moving over to TestStand, the new TestStand strategy, notice that rather than building an MSI installer, we're going to build a package. Now I want to point out here that this type of build spec in TestStand prior to TestStand 2019 was only available in 64-bit TestStand. So if you tried to do this in 32-bit TestStand, this would be grayed out. And newer versions of TestStand finally have, ungrayed that radio button so you can build packages right in the TestStand deployment utility. You could build the package in prior versions, but it had to be 64-bit TestStand, and you could even still include 32-bit operator interfaces or other things in that build. You just had to use the 64-bit version of TestStand to make the build in. So that was a little frustrating. That's fixed now. So now we're going to build a TestStand package. And again, I'm not going to go through all these tabs on the TestStand deployment utility. I think the audience here is largely LabVIEW. And for those of you who know TestStand, you know what those tabs look like. It's just configuration of the build, much like in the LabVIEW build specs. So again, we come back to the file size, and what we end up with is a very small package, something we can email. You don't have to set up an FTP server. You don't have to have a giant removable drive that you can bring to somebody. It's a much more convenient way to deliver your software. So in summary, this slide is showing you if you were to use packages versus delivering packages so you can deliver your packages in two ways. At this point, you can deliver them simply into Package Manager without SystemLink, or you can use SystemLink. So you can see that there's a little bit extra of a step. If you don't use SystemLink, you have to still deliver the package. But since it's only 7 megabytes an hour, let's call it about 10, 10-ish, you can email it. But if you use SystemLink, you can build it right to your server, build it right to the feed. And then it's essentially delivered at that point, sort of. And then you still have to install it with Package Manager. You would still have to open NI Package Manager and install it, and you can only do that locally on the target machine. With SystemLink, you can install it remotely. So once the SystemLink client is on your system, could be anywhere in the world, as an admin, you can go into the web interface and remotely install that system. And if you're like me and you like to work in your pajamas at night, that's kind of cool. TestStand, very similar. You can either install it via Package Manager manually, or you can use SystemLink and install it remotely. The difference with this slide is with TestStand, you can't build it directly to a feed. I suspect that NI will add that feature in future versions of TestStand. I'm not using 2021 yet. I'm using 2020. That feature is not in 2020. I suspect it's coming. Don't quote me on that, but that's just my hunch. So now we've got packages on our SystemLink server. This is a dashboard of what SystemLink looks like. If I get through all my slides, I may do a little bit of live demo, but these are screenshots. So you can see that I have 20 systems under management. And you can see there's some metrics about which ones you are using the most CPU and memory and whatnot. What's also really cool about SystemLink is you can kind of manage all of your systems from a web interface. If you're just delivering packages manually, you're not going to be able to do any of this. So you have to use SystemLink if you want to get to managing lots of systems. If you're internal, if you're an employee somewhere, that might be, a handful of systems in a lab. If you're a consultant, that could be multiple systems across multiple customers, across multiple projects, and that's how I'm using it. So it's kind of a neat way to manage all your customers and projects and systems within those projects. So how do we get to managing all these systems? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a workspace. I like to namespace these in a way that's customer-project type of namespacing. That way I can add users to my groups based on which customer they work at or which project they work on. But one of the key concepts you have to start with in SystemLink is setting up workspaces. By the way, this presentation doesn't cover installing SystemLink Server and configuring it. There's plenty of documentation on the NI website about that. It only runs on Windows currently, so I think for it to be really enterprise class, it eventually needs to get on Linux. But yeah, we've skipped all of the installation and configuration stuff on the server side, and we're skipping right to, okay, now what do I do to actually get projects set up? So you start with a workspace, and then once you have a workspace, you can start adding users to it. For instance, users that work at that customer on that project. You'll notice here that I've got LDAP users. And I'm going to talk a little bit about LDAP in a minute, but you can, if your company uses Active Directory or any other version of LDAP, you can benefit from that by centralizing your logins and your credentials. So in this case, I've added Sam to one of my projects, and Sam actually helped me work on this project. And then you see a couple of the internal users for that project. These are employees at my customer site. So I have a workspace for this customer, for this project, with these users who have access to do things in this workspace. The next thing you have to do is add package repositories to that workspace. And you can see that I've got, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe 10 package repositories here. And a package repository belongs to a workspace. So when you're building a project, a particular piece of software for test equipment for that project, it's going to belong to a workspace. You can have multiple workspaces. If you have a lot of projects going on at a customer, you can have multiple repositories belong to a workspace. So you can organize it in a lot of different ways. This is just kind of the way I've chosen to do it, but you definitely have to start with a workspace. So now I have some repositories added. That's the server side. Oh wait, we still got a little bit more repository work to do here. This is a slide of what's in one of those repositories. So what I have highlighted here is called Gas Test System. That is the ultimate deliverable that I'm giving to my customer to test their. In this case, this is a hazmat. This is a hazmat type of product that's a mask, not like a COVID mask, but like a mask that would protect you from like ammonia or sulfur dioxide or something like that. And they test these masks by running actual gases through filters and measuring outputs. So my LabVIEW project in this case is a executable version 3.2.0, and all of the other packages that you see there are dependencies that got in that I configured to be part of this repository as the dependencies that you'll need. And you're thinking, well, didn't you already do that in the package build? And yes, I did. However, when you add it to the SystemLink server, you have to also tell it where are these coming from? And so you have to go and add these packages to the server. You only have to do this once, because once it's set up, you can go install 100 machines from this same repository. And of course, as it changes, you might have to tweak it and update it. But so the initial setup is the hardest part. You've got to get all of the dependent packages set up on the server. Luckily, NI has most of these published, so you can just grab them from downloads.ni.com, or you can point to feeds if you know the feed URLs. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and I'm not going to get into all those in this presentation. So now I have a repository with the package that I'm trying to deliver to my customer and all the dependency packages that are going to be needed for that system. This slide is sort of a different view. I'm going to go back and show you the dashboard, but this is a view of all the systems I have under management. And you can see that they're grouped by customer and by project. And this is where I end up with the 20 systems. So if we go back to the dashboard, you can see that I have 20 systems under management. If you click on this dashboard, the blue text 20, you will arrive at this screen right here, and you'll see each of your systems. And they all have a little gear next to them, and you can go in and configure various things about each of those. This slide is just to show you sort of hierarchically how I manage things in my workspaces based on which customer they belong to and which project they belong to. So you're thinking, okay, great. Now I just want to put this software on my customer's client. Well, you can simply go get the SystemLink client off ni.com and email it to them because it's small enough, and they can install it. Once they install it, it'll install NI Package Manager. And when it first runs, you'll see in the system tray down there, you'll see the little SystemLink icon, which I have highlighted on this slide. At that point, there's only one thing they can do, which is configure the URL to the server. So in this case, they put in the server URL, systemlink.bouldersoftware.com, and they say apply. That's it. Your customer is pretty much done at that point. Everything up until now has been you setting up your server and building your code. This part is the customer part. You send them the software, they install it, they configure this URL, and now you can remotely install your software on their machine. So that's what their config screen looks like. If they typed it in right, they'll come to this, which says, hey, it's not approved. Meaning it registered with the server, but somebody on the server side needs to approve it. So if I go back to that dashboard, you'll see pending systems is 0. That would change to a 1, and you would go and simply approve the system. So that's what your customer will see while they're waiting for you to do that. Once you've approved it, it'll say connected. And that system is now up and ready to receive software. By the way, you can give your customer access to the web interface to install their own software. They don't have to wait for you to do it. They can log in, and if you grant them the proper permissions, they can install their own software. So, shifting gears a little bit, assuming this link worked and we installed some software, one cool way we can get automatic updates is to use the NI Package Manager API. And you can get this via VI Package Manager. So now now that the SystemLink client is set up and connected to the server, you can actually go and query particular feeds and see if there's new software available, and actually automate the update so that when your customer launches their software, if there's something available, they can get dialogued like this, like, hey, there's an update. Do you want it or not? And if they decide they don't want it, they can click cancel and move on. And if they decide they do want it, much like any other software, the update will occur. I did work quite a while on trying to make this not reboot, because being kind of the Linux guy that I am, I think services should just sort of restart. I'm still experimenting with this. I think I can eventually get it to work. For now, this code actually shows you that it's just going to go ahead and reboot the system. And when it does, it'll come back up and they will have the new version of whatever software you just built for them and built up to the feed. And that would be going back to the repository. That'll be one of these repositories that you would have built that into. And for instance, this particular build is 3.2.0. So if you built a 3.2.1 and this code ran and they clicked OK, it would reboot and 3.2.1 would be installed. So now you have a really cool way of updating not only delivering the software to your customer, but getting them updates easily. Okay, what about security? So SystemLink runs out of the NI web server. And again, this is on Windows. So it comes along with all the Windows security concerns that you might already have, as opposed to, say, a Linux system. But you can see that the URL for this is using HTTPS. So you're going to want to if you already have, if you're an employee somewhere, you might need to go to your IT guy and talk to them about getting certificates. Or if you're running this internally, you might not care because you're behind a firewall on an intranet. In my case, this is a public-facing URL, and I have a signed certificate from a certificate authority. And so you have to install that into your NI web server and use HTTPS. You can see this is again on the SystemLink server. You're configuring the authentication, and the HTTPS is what these two tabs are. So on the right, the HTTPS tab is where you would install your certificate. And in this case, it's my Boulder software certificate. And you can simply install an already signed certificate. You can also create self-signed if you want to just experiment with it. There's plenty of open source certificate signing things you can try out there. The one I use is legit, like purchased. Then on the other tab on the left is this is not a certificate issue. This is a authentication issue. Like, how am I authenticating my users? And I have all the checkboxes ticked here, but you don't have to use all of them. And in fact, I don't. I only use the last one, which is LDAP. So at Boulder Software, we use LDAP for every one of our tools. We use it for our bug tracker, for our Git server, and for SystemLink. So once employee or subcontractor is created in our LDAP server, they have one password and one username to get into all of our tools. So I can turn them on or off very easily and disable their access to everything. And I allow my customers into this as well. They simply create an account on our server, and I assign them to an LDAP group. But if you look at the checkboxes above this, you can use Windows logins, like local Windows accounts, or you can even set up users on the NI web server. So there's a lot of different choices here. One of the things actually, I'll save that for another slide. Hang on just one second. Okay, I was just checking a little bit of the chatter on the back. I'm hoping if we have questions that I'll be done with this soon. So let's talk about LDAP just for a minute. If you don't know what LDAP is, it's the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. You can think of it as if you're working at an employer that uses Microsoft Active Directory, that's Microsoft's version of LDAP. We don't use that. We use Open LDAP, and there's a lot of different flavors of LDAP out there, but basically it's a way to authenticate people. Kind of like username and password. There's a lot more that you can do with LDAP besides that, but that's one of its most common uses. And I found some problems in SystemLink with LDAP, and I logged some bugs with NI. I don't think they have them all sorted out yet, but I found a workaround. So for now, I have allowed them to close my issues. But just so you know, SystemLink seems to support Microsoft's flavor, but it seems to support that one the best, but not as well on the other ones. So you might find yourself running into workarounds or things that don't work. If you're using Microsoft Active Directory, you're probably going to be okay. Seems to be what they tend to support. So now we have a bunch of systems. And then again, if you're an employee somewhere, you might not care about all the security and access, but as a consultant, you're going to have a lot of customers. You might have an aerospace customer here and a medical customer there, and they might have 2 or 3 projects each. You want to break all that up so that one employee at one place can't see what's going on or mess with a system on another workspace. So you end up with this sort of hierarchy of, hey, these workspaces belong to this server, and these clients belong to these workspaces. And as I showed you in the one slide, users belong to workspaces. So that's how you sort all that out. Now I have SystemLink Server and my clients. Okay, that's most of my presentation. The rest of it is sort of a bonus. And this is sort of an afterthought for me. I thought, well, if I can install my software to my customers automatically, what about my employees' development environments, making sure they're the same, or my subcontractors? So I don't know how you all do work. I use virtual machines for almost everything. I have several dozen, probably almost 50 virtual machines at this point. And the reason I do that is because each project's unique, and trying to do it all on one version of LabVIEW, or trying to install lots of versions on LabVIEW on one machine or TestStand gets to be kind of a mess. So one of the problems I've had is when building a TestStand project, one of my subcontractors' dev environments wasn't exactly like mine. It was really close, but there was some nuanced difference in the versions of TestStand we had. I think it was I think it was like F1 versus F2 or something like that. Anyway, so I thought, well, why don't I automate building the dev environment as well? And so enter NI Package Builder, not NI Package Manager, but NI Package Builder. So now you can build your own packages with NI Package Builder rather than doing them from the LabVIEW project build spec or from the TestStand deployment utility. And what we end up with there is this. You can barely see this graphic, but you can sort of put these input folders on the left and then tell them where they're going to get deployed on the right. And what I ended up doing there is putting particular versions of LabVIEW and TestStand as part of this package. And I'll show you how I did that in a minute. And that way, when my subcontractor or employee goes to build their dev environment, I simply give them this package. They start with a blank Windows 10 virtual machine that has absolutely zero NI software on it, and it installs the proper LabVIEW dev environment and the proper TestStand dev environment, and all the toolkits and things that they need to make that work. Minus VI Package Manager. Haven't sorted that part out yet. One of the reasons I do that is because I have all these repositories that I also need to get on the dev environment. So if you look at this slide, I don't know how well you can see the text, but you can see that I have to put the repository itself, in this case, the burn-in station, needs to go in public documents, Instratech, OCM. That's my customer and project. But I also need to put things in instrument lib. Well, that directory isn't really even remotely close to that on the disk. They're disparate folders. They're spread out all over the disk. And then when you get into TestStand, it gets even worse because now you need TestStand config and components. And those live in very different places like program data and public. So now I can include those in my package. And now my subcontractor or employee can take this package and not only get the proper LabVIEW or TestStand dev environment installed, they can also get all of these Git repositories installed. Now, mind you, this is for provisioning a development environment. You don't want to do this. You don't want to run this package every time. This is just for onboarding a developer. After that, they're going to want to use Tortoise Git or whatever to keep their Git repositories synchronized. This is simply onboarding a new developer. And this is a screenshot of the NI package builder for getting that set up for those disparate targets on the disk. So this is a screenshot of NI package builder. And then you build that package and give it to your developer, and they should be really close to onboarded and ready to develop. The way I figured that out is on your development system. You can go down into this file and program data and figure out all the packages that are installed on your machine. There's the URI. So you simply go and strip all those URIs out and make this text file out of it. And you cut and paste those into NI package builder as feeds and save that package and build it. It's a little tedious. I don't have this all automated yet, but it's getting there. Anyway, that's kind of a bonus. The real point of this whole presentation is deploying. This is more about replicating dev environments. At any rate, that is my last slide. That one is from the GDevCon, which was more about boulders. So that is my presentation, and I'm ready to take questions because I'm already over by 3 minutes. Is there a moderator that can help me, or? No. I'm going to go into the Q&A. I'm watching the chat, but I'm going to go in. Oh, there's nothing in the Q&A, so I'm going to try to field some things from the chat. Theodore Biaga says, is there a way to distribute for installation ISO installers from NI? I'm not sure I understand that question. You can get all of the NI SystemLink stuff right from NI. I don't know if it's via package manager. As far as the ISO, I tend to make those manually, so I'm not sure if that answers your question or not. You want to use local downloaded already packages. You can open package manager and then just install them that way. Oh, I see. Yeah, package manager crashes. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that situation. I don't know. It's probably because it's looking for feeds. You may have to go into package manager and clear your feeds out and start from scratch. I mean, if you have a downloaded package, it should install. But if it's depending on other packages, then it's going to need some feeds. I'm going to move on to another question. David Plentz is asking, it's my opinion, there are several steps for CREO and so on. So I haven't done a lot of package manager on CREO, but supposedly it works. I haven't had much time to experiment with it yet. And I suspect that that's only on newer CREOs because the RTOSs have changed over time. I don't know what the minimum is. I'm guessing it's around 2019, LabVIEW 2019. But from what I understand, SystemLink does work with CREO. I just haven't played with it very much. I actually just sent my CREO back to NI recently, so I don't have one to use right now. I was going to do a little bit of live demo, but I don't know how much time I don't think we have too much time left. Let me see if there's any other questions in here I can answer. Is there not a moderator at all, Tom, or? No, okay. Just somebody asking about salt minion errors. There's definitely logs regarding all the salt stuff. If you go and dig through the program data or the if you go dig through some of the NI folders in public and program data, there's lots of logs regarding salt errors and other errors. I'm not sure if that helps you guys. Here's a question. Can this be linked to automatically download the latest version from a build server? I did cover that in one of my slides using NI Package Manager API. I will go back and show that real quick. So there is an API. You can see the blue icons on the masthead. Again, that's via VI Package Manager. You can download that. There's quite a bit in there. This is a real simple example. It just queries a feed to see if there's a latest version. So that's to answer Nathan Beesman's. Someone else asked about CRIOs. And if they're blank from the factory, I doubt it. I think you're going to have to install a SystemLink client on there. Again, I haven't played with the RIO that much yet. Sam Roundy talks about doing packages on disconnected machines. Yep, you can certainly not even use SystemLink and just build packages. SystemLink doesn't have to be part of this at all. Al Braga says, I've heard that that LabVIEW will be migrating away from the installer in favor of packages only. I think that's true. Eric Reffett was at the GDevCon conference we had here in Boulder last month, and I don't think I wouldn't quote him on that, but I think that was kind of the impression I got from some of the things he was saying. Sam Roundy also says SystemLink is a memory process hog. It is doing a lot of stuff. So there is a scoping guideline on ni.com about what type of server you'll need, how many gigabytes of RAM, how much disk storage, et cetera, how many cores of a CPU you'll need. So that there's already a guideline out there for that. I'm actually looking at doing a really large deployment. If I get the contract, fingers crossed, that could be hundreds of systems. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, there is a scalability document out there. Let me see if there's any new questions. It looks like there is stuff on the Q&A now. Nathan Beeman says, what has your experience been with SystemLink stability? It has been quite unreliable for me. So mine's been really stable. I run it on a subdomain, so systemlink.bouldersoftware.com. That is a separate system from bouldersoftware.com, and it's dedicated only to SystemLink. There's nothing else running on that machine. My network's very stable. I don't have a lot of outages. My internet service provider is very stable at the office. So I haven't seen any of these reliability issues. By the way, if you have any new questions, why don't you go ahead and toss them in the Q&A tab instead of the chat. We're not going to have much more time anyway. But if you do, put them there. That way I can kind of field them better. So yeah, Nathan, I haven't seen any instability. It's been pretty rock solid for me. Nathan says the service itself tends to crash. So I would check I would check your config, your number of cores, your memory. I would definitely go through your Windows logs and try to figure out what those crashes, error codes are. Again, I haven't had that problem. I suspect there's a configuration problem or a system scalability problem, just off the top of my head. I'm scanning through the chat some more to see if there's any other questions I can field. I don't see too much else. So if that's it, I was going to try to do some live demo, but I don't think I have much time left. So I'm going to leave it at that. If you guys have any follow-up, feel free to reach out at me. I'm john@bouldersoftware.com, or you can just go to the website and go to the contact us. You can hit me on LinkedIn too. I'm pretty easy to find if you have any questions. But I appreciate you guys coming to the session. Hope you're having a good time at the GLA summit. I know I am, and I really appreciate your attendance on this. I'm planning on using this going forward for a lot of different projects. So far, it's worked out really well. Okay, well, at that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude. Thank you guys for coming, and enjoy the rest of the summit.